I'm excited for the future of DC on the screen. Superman Legacy, just Superman, looks really cool, and I think James Gunn has some really interesting and exciting ideas about how to set up this new cinematic universe. The thing I'm most excited for is his insistence on exploring lesser-known or even somewhat obscure DC characters going forward as a subversion of their previous universe, which was really only focused on well-known Justice League members or their immediately adjacent characters. I have gone on record many times saying that I have a preference of superhero media being adapted in animation over live-action television because the medium is nearly limitless in what they could pull off that would be a budgetary concern for a film or TV show. I'm also a fan of Gunn's previous works at DC and Marvel. His Suicide Squad was a blast, Peacemaker's a lot of fun, and the Guardians trilogy is incredible. So with all this in mind, you'd think I would have loved Creature Commandos. James Gunn helming an animated series full of eccentric and obscure DC characters in a mature tone is, like, tailor-made for me to think this is awesome. Especially since they have monster-themed characters and I'm a huge horror hound outside of my comic book fandom. It's checking every box for stuff I'm into, and yet, I really didn't like Creature Commandos. I wish I did, but I didn't. And if you'll hear me out, I'd like to share with you why I think this show just fell short for me. And maybe you'll feel the same way about a few things, or maybe you can offer some of your own insights if you were someone who enjoyed it. Stick with me as we figure out why the Creature Commandos didn't succeed in their mission. Creature Commandos is a soft reboot of the DC Universe bouncing off the events of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, where Amanda Waller can no longer use human inmates for her Black Ops missions, and has instead opted to use people who don't quite fit the legal definition of human for her newest globe-trotting adventure. So the team consists of a reanimated corpse, a robot, an animal man, a radioactive skeleton, and so on, and they've been sent to a fictional nation to protect their vulnerable monarch from being attacked by a supervillain and her army of Twitter users that call the site X now. But not everything is as it seems. Except it is how it seems. Oh wait, no it's not! Actually, yes it is. The new series from Warner Brothers and HBO Max, but they changed their name and deleted half their shows, isn't without its fans, and that's for good reason. It's a vibe-focused, character-driven series with decent animation, some big stars, and a really excellent art design overall. The characters, outfits, locations, and powers all look incredible in this first season, and it humorously expands the new DC Universe's budding lore with a mature and cynical edge that'll set the stage perfectly for a lighthearted Superman to brighten things up. Being helpful and nice is now unique again! It's counterculture to not be a snarky asshole! But my problems with the show start at its clumsy handling of these characters, who admittedly have so much untapped potential. I also found that it's character-driven. Wasn't a strong enough excuse to make up for its poor story structure and lack of intrigue, because ultimately, the characters don't drive it very much either. This show feels low energy and full of bitter ambivalence disguised as cool factor, making for a dull season of television that I had a hard time sitting through. This is made worse by some lackluster performances from the cast that compound the boredom by coming off inauthentic and dry. The biggest saving grace of Creature Commandos are its visuals and some attempts at interesting themes, even if they don't quite pay off either. For those who haven't seen the show, big spoilers ahead, there's only so much I could talk about up until now. One of the biggest staples of James Gunn's superhero work has always been his ability to balance a large cast of quirky characters and build interesting team dynamics among them. But the nature of the plot in Cretan Commanders hampers this usual team building from happening organically. Unlike James Gunn's other superhero ensemble projects, the Creature Commandos spend most of the show separated from each other, either alone or in small groups of two, so a proper group dynamic really never has the chance to form. They begin the series being antagonistic and sarcastic at each other, and then they end the season the same way, with no real growth. They don't have the time to form any real bonds as a team and become more like a family, nor do they have time to really start to understand and hate each other if the goal was for them to not get along. They're just co-workers through the whole season. Compare this to how quickly the Guardians became a dysfunctional but loving family unit, or how the Suicide Squad went from a team of eccentric and angry loners to being friends. Bloodsport and Peacemaker's rivalry was a fun dynamic because they're very similar characters. Peacemaker's betrayal of Rick Flag over their differing definitions of duty to their country, forcing them into a battle to the death with some incredible drama. The Creature Commandos don't have anything like that going on for them because they're all separate from most of the show, doing unrelated things until converging at the end where their mission basically falls apart, and most of them still don't know each other very well. The one kind of exception to this is Fish Lady Nina and the Bride of Frankenstein being paired together. It makes sense having them form a bond since the Bride is an old cynic that's been around for a long time and Nina is young and has a very hopeful demeanor. A great buddy dynamic is built on being opposites. It makes perfect sense to have Nina's kindness warm the Bride's cold heart and give her a more optimistic outlook on the world, or the Bride's pragmatism, helping Nina to be less naive and become stronger in the face of danger. I see what they were going for there, but the dialogue never quite gets it there. The Bride is still very cynical and mean to Nina, even after they've been together for a while. And Nina doesn't really have an impactful moment to sway the Bride to show her the flaws in her nihilistic outlook. The Bride is just so guarded and so steeped in her anger that Nina doesn't seem to rub off on her, and they don't get a moment where they really seem like they're building chemistry as friends. There are a couple scenes that come close, but they just don't pull it off. The writing is not there. I never buy that they're actually becoming close in any substantial way. So it's especially weird at the end of the season when the Bride insists that Nina's her best friend ever.
I'm killing you because you took the life of the only friend I have.
She sure didn't make it seem that way. If I was Nina, I'd die not knowing what this lady thinks of me, and that's just kind of a bummer too. Nina's the heart of the show because she's the nicest person among a cast of bad guys and cynics and sarcastic assholes. She's the one respite we have from all the bitterness, so killing her off so soon just leaves the show with no heart. Now we're stuck with all these grouchy jerks and no one to temper them down. So in that sense, it also doesn't feel like Nina properly fulfilled her role as uniting the group by being the best of them. G.I. Robot and the Bride are the only ones she interacts with, and the rest of them seem to not really care about her one way or another. She's far from the only character that feels wasted. G.I. Robot was dispatched way too early. Weasel's backstory doesn't really factor into anything but making you feel sympathy for him, and he's not helpful for the majority of the show after taking down Cersei. I guess it adds context as to why he'd try to protect the princess and fuck everything up at the end, but I don't know, I don't think we needed a bunch of flashbacks for that. And honestly, Eric Frankenstein is such a worthless-ass character. They spend the whole season shoving him into the plot and making us suffer through his honestly terrible voice acting, just so it could all be a big punchline.
Save it for hell, you stalker piece of shit.
He doesn't help the team. He doesn't get in their way beyond a minor inconvenience. He's just there. I think he's the most useless part of the entire season, and I found it boring dedicating so much time to a character that doesn't really affect anything. And he wasn't funny to me, so I was just suffering every time he was on screen. Even his brief alliance with Flag Sr. doesn't really amount to a whole lot, and this same string of events could have happened with Flag encountering and beating Clayface on his own. The only thing gained from that was casting doubt on Cersei's story, and Flag didn't need Frankenstein to help him do any of this. I don't even find his backstory episode compelling because all it tells us is that he's an obsessive freak that cares about nothing but the Bride, which we already knew from her backstory episode. Like, was any of this relevant information? It wasn't entertaining, so is it relevant? No. The flashbacks in general feel grating. The show's pacing comes grinding to a halt to show us the secret backstories of each of these characters. You know, like Lost. But the problem is that we're not often learning anything about the character we couldn't already parse through context clues and dialogue. I approve of showing instead of telling, that's basic cinematic language, but this is a really ham-fisted and cliche way to handle that. I think I started to realize that the flashbacks are kind of interchangeable through the season. The thing that Lost did better about this was that the character whose flashbacks we were seeing was highlighted as being relevant to the main story in the present day. That way, getting to know more about their history in these vignettes mattered because it was informing us why they mattered to the story happening now. In Creature Commandos, These flashbacks happen in a way that almost feels random, and sometimes the highlighted character is not doing anything important or relevant in the modern day. Frankenstein's flashback story doesn't help anything, and he's doing the same shit in that episode he is in all of the others, which is being annoying. Weasel's backstory, while tragic, could be shown at any point, and he spends all of the present-day half of that same episode just standing around doing nothing. He's like taking a nap. I'll give credit where it's due. The Brides made sense because she was exploring the same castle where she was created. It was like, oh, you know, it's the memories are coming back from being in this location. G.I. Robot died in that episode after helping them to stop the bad guys, so it made sense to focus on him, I guess. And Nina's flashbacks were impactful because she was forced into the position of being the lead assassin on the team, but everyone else just kind of hangs out, and their flashbacks could happen in any order, and I don't even really feel like I learned anything new or important from some of them. I just think the characters could have been utilized in a more interesting way in the main story to justify why we're spending so much time looking back on their origins. Because as it is, they're pretty much one-note characters that aren't invested in what they're doing in the present day, so I'm not invested in what they're doing in the past. It really seems like through the whole season, there weren't any personal stakes for these characters to complete the mission. They never found a reason to care about why they were doing what they were doing. They're often just following orders with the same sardonic attitude like, yeah, we're going, whatever. Again, it reminds me of Suicide Squad, where they started very much the same way, but towards the end they became emotionally invested in saving the people of Corto Maltese after getting to know them and their plight against their authoritarian government. Harley wanted to stop children from dying and didn't want to fall back into old habits of helping bad men. A few of the squad members could relate to being experimented on and felt pity for Starro and anger at Project Starfish for doing such terrible things to her. Peacemaker and Rick Flag Jr. both had clashing ideologies about how to handle the situation because of their loyalties, and the whole team came together in the end to go against their orders and save the city from Starro as a way to redeem themselves for all the bad things they've done. No one in Creature Commandos gives a fuck about anything, especially not their mission. They're all here because they have to be. So if the characters don't care about what they're doing, it's hard for me to care about what they're doing. And I guess I can't blame them for being bored because the main villain of the season is really bland too. Princess Alana seduces Rick Flag Sr. to gain his trust and then hires Clayface to cast doubt on Cersei's vision of the future. But her plan is to invade America and take over the world and kill all the superheroes for some reason. At some point. We never actually learn any kind of character motivation for this. We don't know why or how she's planning to do any of this, just that she's going to. Eventually, and for some reason no one will be able to stop her. There's not even some kind of dramatic ticking clock element of assassinating her before the plan is enacted. Cersei makes it sound like it's gonna happen in a few years, and all we know about the plan is the cliff notes from this montage, so it's hard to be invested if I'm not even sure how she's gonna do any of this. Why is she a threat? I don't know, because Cersei saw it in the future. Like, there's no doomsday weapon counting down, nor is she planning to launch her attack tomorrow at dawn. There's nothing to give us any sense of urgency, which leads to the show's pacing feeling lethargic. Everyone's just kind of slowly walking there. Take your time, guys. You'll get her eventually. No rush, though. You got plenty of time.
Okay, so just to be clear, the main conflict of the show is that they have to prevent the villain from taking over the world at some unspecified point in time through unspecified means for an unspecified reason.
The biggest question left by the plot overall is, did they need to be monsters for this? For being a team of universal monster movie inspired characters, that sure didn't factor into the story being told here at all, and I think this same half-baked plot could have just as easily been used for a standard Suicide Squad roster. There was nothing that was achieved here that couldn't have been pulled off by those bozos. Could they not have found a more fitting bad guy for the monster team? How about fighting a superpowered mummy in Egypt, or thwarting Dracula's plans for world domination, or beating some kind of dark magic wizard that summons demons and living skeletons, or I don't know, anything. I just think it'd be cooler to have monsters fight monsters, or have the villain they're fighting be reflective of their theme. But instead, it's European princess with no superpowers lording over an army of soldiers with no superpowers. which also makes for some really boring fight scenes where the creatures are just getting into gunfights with regular humans. Half the time, it seems like the only way to resolve the fight scene is to have one particularly motivated commando run out into the center of the battlefield and just spin around shooting in all directions and hitting everything with deadly accuracy like John Matrix, which is just kind of a boring way to choreograph your action. The hand-to-hand stuff is where it's a lot more interesting, but you have to slog through a fair amount of boring-ass gunplay to get there. The show's animation is generally pretty solid, but I can't help but notice the times where it distractingly dips into just being rigged animation and it starts to look like Archer for a split second. I think there was some clever budgetary allocation happening where they knew certain scenes needed to be prioritized over others, leading to a lopsided visual quality, which, considering the expensive celebrity voice cast, is at least an improvement over Invincible, which looks pretty stiff 90% of the time and has celebrity voices. I've heard some people excuse the dullness of this first season by going, well, it's character-driven, not plot-driven. And I see where you're coming from, but the problem is that I don't really like these characters. Outside of, they have cool designs and costumes. Everyone is so bitter and cruel to each other, and yes, I know they have their reasons, but I don't think enough humanity was given to them to make up for it. The idea they were going for reminds me of the Doom Patrol show, where everyone in that series was a really screwed up, depressed, and neurotic character, but they always had these moments of vulnerability with each other to show they're not content with being miserable. They wanted better, and it certainly helped their character dynamics that they actually spent time around each other. I got way more of a complete and complex set of characters out of one episode of that show compared to a whole season of this. There's just not enough here to make anyone likable outside of good character designs and some badass fight moves. Half the team died or are too feral or just too simple-minded to have any character at all, really. And the other half are just jerks who don't know anything about each other. Maybe they could have done something like Nina and the Bride could have learned about Phosphorus and focused on different parts of his backstory to dwell on. Like, oh, you lost your daughter, that's so sad. But also, oh, you killed the crime boss's whole family, that's terrible. And then we could have had some drama with the group fighting it out about what to feel about each other now that they know each other better. Nope, more montages with accordions blaring. It's just a muddy show, and that extends to its themes. I can't tell if I'm supposed to forgive these characters because they have sad backstories, or if I'm supposed to dislike a lot of them. I never felt anything for Rick Flag Sr., and I really don't give a damn about him at all, so let's set up that character for failure in the future. He just seems like a naive, whipped idiot. I suppose his manipulation by the princess ties in with the main theme here, and that he was swayed by her after they were intimate so that he couldn't be objective about her as a person anymore. There seems to be a through line about misogyny in the show, and I think that's worth exploring and commenting on as a topic. I'm not one of those guys. Cersei's got a bunch of those guys as her army to attack the princess, and they're easily manipulated buffoons shouting buzzwords with no real thoughts of their own. Much like real life. The Bride was created to satisfy Eric's urges, but had no consent being designed for such a purpose and has spent her whole life trying to step out from being an object for some undead idiot's fantasies. Eric Frankenstein is an obsessive loser that can't take a hint no matter how much you pound it into him that she's just not interested. There's that whole diversion to the brothel in Pokolistan where those men with superpowers are abusing the workers until they get some much-needed street justice. Even Mina's father forces a life onto her that she didn't ask for and leaves her with no agency until she runs away and finally becomes her own person. I feel like James Gunn really wants to say something about men's treatment of women with these things and bodily autonomy, and it's potent material, but it doesn't coalesce into anything with the show's finale. There's not one big beat to tie a big ribbon on the theme. The plot about the evil princess using Iron Man knights to take over America consumes everything in that last episode, and none of these build to a satisfying thematic conclusion. It's more just a recurring thing that pops up, is that throughout the show, women aren't treated like real people and have their autonomy taken by men. I think the theme is powerful and all the pieces are there, but I needed one last strong punch at the end to punctuate that and make it all work as one idea instead of kind of scattered thoughts sprinkled throughout the episodes. And then, of course, there's my biggest gripe of all, the voice acting. Now, I understand, the idea behind this show's casting was that they could all be introduced in animation first, with the characters modeled after their voice actors, and then they can appear in live-action projects portrayed by the same actors. I'll admit the concept has some novelty, but much like most Hollywood animation, they spent top dollar, spared no expense, put everything on the line for really amateur-sounding voice acting. There's a big difference between screen acting and voice acting behind a microphone, and this show is a great example of that. All of these actors have turned in great performances in live-action roles over the years, but here it sounds like most of them are reading off names from a phone book. Frank Grillo and David Harbour are especially dry in this series. David Harbour is an incredible actor, and I've really enjoyed some of his work in other movies and shows. Hell, I think he even could have been a great Hellboy if he had a better script and a less restrictive costume, but he is the weakest member of this cast by far.
Why do you not look at me when you speak? It is disrespectful. My bride, she plays these little fetch-me games, but she knows inside, as I do, that we are destined to be together.
Right. So maybe we can help each other.
Eric Frankenstein is already written to be really annoying for comedic effect, but the performance doesn't make him funny and push him over the edge of being likable. Instead, he's written to be really irritating, and he speaks like he's bored all the time. There's nothing charming about this character, and every time he needs to show some really exaggerated emotions, it comes across stale and disinterested. He can't be pathetic enough for it to be funny. He can't be silly enough for it to become like a lovable jerk type character, and we're all left with this big bore.
For not being able to grow hair on my face, as if that makes me some sort of baby man. Once I save her from making this tragic error, I'm pretty sure she won't be able to deny how she and I are meant to be together. So, why don't you do what you were born to do, to play your small role in this romantic adventure, and turn the fuck around and fly?
I bet if you put Harbour in a Frankenstein's monster costume and pointed a camera at him and told him to be a 200-year-old incel, he would nail it. It would be so funny. Especially with gun directing, since he has real comedy chops. But it doesn't work here. I look at Eric Frankenstein and just think about how much more nuance would have been brought to this character by an actor like Fred Tatasciore or John DiMaggio or Kevin Michael Richardson. A seasoned professional VA that's comfortable behind the microphone and has that vocal range to portray a wide variety of emotions would have made this character work. Gunn directed the voice actors in their home studios over a Zoom call, and it just doesn't have the sauce. Because voice directing is so different from live action, I think this is his first time doing an entire animated production's voice direction by himself like this, and it feels like a noticeable step down from the usual performances he can get from his actors. No one's matching each other's energy, everyone sounds bored or talks too softly. The only one who knows what he's doing is Alan Tudyk, and he's acting circles around everyone else because he's the only one with a strong background in voice acting. I found this show really annoying most of the time because I never believed anyone's performances sounded authentic. It always felt to me like they were doing a table read for the first time, and the animation was just overlaid on top of that. No one's in the moment, they're just reading the text. Given how long a series like this takes to produce, this was likely started before James Gunn was put in charge of DC Studios. I think at one point this was more of a side thing he wanted to do between all of his other larger projects. And then things worked out in such an odd and unfortunate way that it turned into an introduction for a whole new DC universe. Now we don't have this fresh start with Superman as a jumping off point, we have this show that's still tied to the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, but with a big asterisk on that continuity. That's why I think this and Peacemaker Season 2 will have this strange timeline overlap. They were conceived to exist in the previous franchise, but were too far along to cancel when management changed. What was meant to just be a low-stakes little side project ended up being thrust into this spotlight as a launch pad for a whole new franchise, when I really feel like it was never meant to be that. And I definitely feel like it wasn't as important to James Gunn as some of his other projects, because there's just not the same effort on display here as his other stuff. Between Guardians 3, Guardians Christmas Special, The Suicide Squad, 2 seasons of Peacemaker, and a brand new Superman movie that everything hinges on, the guy's been spreading himself thin. I have a feeling that Creature Commandos could have been on par with his other work if he had more time to focus on it, but instead, It feels like the show is on the second or third draft for its script. All things considered, I think it speaks to Gunn's talents as a writer that it's still really watchable and has a fair amount of fans, but for me it just didn't work, like, on any level. It feels like a parody of Gunn's body of superhero work. It has all of the tropes, eccentric and grouchy characters, a big muscle-bound idiot tagging along, snappy sarcastic dialogue, found family, blah 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 blah, cute little animal character, but it doesn't have the same charm that makes all these other examples work. It just falls flat on its face because it was like 6th or 7th on his list of priorities, and I imagine Superman is where all his real brain power has been aimed for these past few years. Like I said, I'm still excited for the future of Gunn's DCU, but unfortunately, this was a really shaky first step forward. I always get mad at YouTube for not putting my videos in the subscription box because people will comment, "Finally, Xavier uploads again after all these years," not knowing 3 other videos came out within the last month already. So maybe that stupid bell icon thing will help you remember I exist. If you want other ways to support the channel, you can always go hit up that Patreon for early videos and exclusive stuff because it's just $1. I'm not kidding, it's only $1. Isn't that cool? If just 5% of the people subscribed to me donated only $1 a month, I could make videos even faster and keep my house. You can also check out our merch on TeePublic, or just buy some of my random stuff on eBay. I have a pretty substantial collection of old toys that are still in the box in perfect condition, so go take a look in case you find something you like. And lastly, since this is a YouTube video and you probably play Fortnite, drop my creator code XavierGM next time you buy a silly dance or a cool character skin. Really helps me out. See you next time!